Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle Haas. I hope you guys don't mind my current setup, but I'm on the road traveling and visiting my family, but I still wanted to make some videos for the YouTube channel because today's video is one that I think is really important. I think for a lot of people who, watch my channel, we're all into, the numbers with regards to comic books, whether we want to invest in stuff or we want to spec on stuff. And there's one idea within investing in comic books that I feel like we don't talk enough about. And that is this idea of looking at comps when buying our comic books. I think a lot of people right now buy stuff based on speculation with, MCU movies and what's going to, blow up. Oh, next year we're going to get Moon Knight. Oh, next year we're going to get She-Hulk. So we're buying these comic books at numbers that are really, a lot of times overinflated, or we think that, there's going to be a certain ceiling that these books are going to hit, but we don't really have any data or comparables to base what these numbers are going to actually be. And in every other industry, whether you were buying a car, or you were buying a house, or you were buying stocks, you would be looking at comparable companies, trying to figure out, what the values and what the intrinsic values of those assets are. And then you would make your decision on what you want to spend for a particular thing like a house or a car, etc. And I don't think that we do enough of that in comic books. So I kind of want to show you guys, a couple of books right here, specifically Eternals #1 and Special Marvel Edition #15. Of course, Eternals 1 is the first appearance of the Eternals and Icarus and characters like that. Special Marvel Edition 15 is the first appearance of Shang-Chi. And I wanted to look at some of the numbers with you guys. And, for those who don't know, those books went absolutely astronomical this year based on movie speculation and have come back down to earth. I mean, they're still a little bit higher than where they were, say, a year or two ago, but they've definitely come down. And I have some sort of comparables and some data that I want to go through with you guys and show you that, if you had bought these books using more comparable data, you would have been able to protect your investment and not lose out on that money. Because as I will get into it here, there are certain people who bought, say, Eternals #1 for $3,800, and they basically, lost out on $2,000 of investment money because now you can get it for, $1,500. So how can we be better comic book investors, better comic book collectors by using comparables of other books to make smart decisions when we buy our comic books? So that's kind of what this video is about here today. So, let's kind of go through the numbers and take a look at some of this stuff. So of course, Eternals #1, the first book I want to talk about, this is the first appearance of Icarus. There's also a couple other first appearances, but generally speaking, people value this book because it is Icarus's first appearance and effectively the first appearance of the name of the Eternals, etc. And this is a book, of course, got super hot in the market because of the Eternals movie. And, with this 2021 comic book market, everybody was going crazy with this thing. So let's just focus in on the 9.8 specifically, right? Because that's, I think that there's enough copies to talk about this book, enough data to sort of parse through it and get a sense of what had happened here. So, if we start at the top of the year, say at the end of 2020 or right here, 12/31/2020, we can see that the average price for this book was around $1,700 overall, right? $1,700. We go into 2021, this thing skyrockets all the way up to $3,334. That's just the average. We actually had a record high of $3,800. Of course, this is a couple months before the film actually debuted. So this is probably around when we started to get those first couple trailers. Now we flash forward to today, and we can see that this book is selling at an average price around $1,500. So definitely down from, where it was at the beginning of the year. Now, if we go into this drop-down menu here, we can see that there are, record highs and record lows. Again, last couple sales for this book has been $1,500, $1,500, $1,400. There was a $1,900 book right here. And then somewhere here, like I said, in April, I believe, we had a $3,800 sale right there. So May 10th, $3,800. Someone went big with this book, and now, they can get it for $1,500. So they definitely lost out on, $2,300 of investment money for this particular comic book. So, the question is, how do we, as comic book collectors and investors, how do we protect ourselves so that, when we think we want to invest in something, we think we want to buy a certain comic book, how can we be sure what the value of that thing, will be? What will be the support level for a book like that? And I think sometimes there are those in the comic book community that say oh, this book is undervalued. This book's going to go to the moon. This book's going to explode. But we're basing that off of just the idea that, that, we're going to get some movie property that has these characters, there's really nothing to support where the book's value is going to be. So this is where I think the idea of comps is really important. And there's two books that I kind of wanted to talk about with regards to this, specifically that of Nova #1 and Defenders #28. Now, why do I specifically bring up these two books? Well, there's a couple of reasons here. Most importantly, I think that these are books that came out around the same time. So we can see Eternals #1 came out in June 30 of 1976. We'll look at Nova #1 came out in August 31 of 1976, so only like a couple months later. And then Defenders #28 came out September 30, 1975, so just the year before that. And then, of course, if you guys don't know, Nova is the first appearance of Richard Rider Nova, and then Defenders #28 is the first appearance of Starhawk. So I think that these are interesting character comparables to evaluate with regards to, the Eternals film, because Starhawk actually exists in the MCU, so it's a character that's, is definitely, in pop culture. It's played by Sylvester Stallone. And then Nova is a character that I would say is much more popular in terms of like the comic book character than the Eternals are. So, maybe the Eternals were going to have their movie, and then people were going to start to, think of them as a household name. And then maybe they could eventually become like on the level of sort of a Richard Rider Nova. That's how I would think of the Eternals. I mean, certainly, we could have had an Eternals movie that absolutely was the best movie ever made in the history of superhero films. And then Icarus became literally the most popular superhero there is. That's definitely possible. But, I think it's more important to really be conservative in our approach of what we think these movies are going to do with these characters and look at them in comparison to other superheroes that the comic book market often pursues. So characters like Nova and characters like Starhawk, I think, are good comparable characters because they're both in the cosmic world. They all came out at the same time, and they're all characters that, generally people are speculating on. So let's take a look at some of the numbers for Nova #1 and what they've kind of done this year here on GPA. So luckily, we can also compare 9.8s because there are a decent amount of 9.8s that exist for a book like this. And if we look at Nova #1, we'll see that right here in 2021, the record high for this book was $2,500 and the record low was $1,000. When we started the year at like 12/20, or when we start right here, 12/31/2020, the average price for this thing was $1,000. So if we remember, the average price for the Eternals book was $1,700. At some point, there was a high around $2,000. At the same time when the Eternals trailer was coming out, the high for that again was around the $3,300 mark. And then now the book kind of still sits around that level at the $2,100, $2,000 range. So to me, what that suggests is that this is the floor for a book like this, or there's a strong support level at the $2,000 range. We don't expect a Nova movie to come out, at least, not in the next year or so. We've never got any confirmation that we're going to get that. People think that there might be a Nova movie eventually, but right now, just in terms of comic book collectors who are passionate about collecting a book and maybe they're speculating on it, right now, $2,000 is a strong floor for a book like this. So if we rewind the clock now and we are, say, someone that wants to speculate on Eternals #1, and you were someone who, wanted to buy it at that time, maybe before the movie, my recommendation to you would have been, hey, look at the values of Nova #1. What is it selling for right now before the movie of Eternals comes out, and compare that and think to yourself, is this something that you feel like is overinflated? Do you feel like, this is a book that can continue to reach new higher highs in comparison to a book like Nova #1? And if you did that, maybe you would have thought to yourself, okay, like Nova #1 is valued at around $2,000. If I'm going to spec or invest on Eternals #1, maybe I don't want to be spending more than $2,100, $2,200 or so, right? Maybe you would want to stay around that level. And if you had done that, even now where we are with the book dropping down to $1,500, you would have definitely at least kind of hedged your bet a little bit and protected your investment, because I still believe that Eternals #1 could definitely get back up to $2,000. I mean, if we get Icarus back in the MCU, and 100% we're going to see him again. I mean, if we get these characters, they may not get a sequel. There may not be an Eternals #2, but these characters are going to show up again in the MCU. There's no denying that. So I think that those books can definitely reach $2,000. And I think if you were to have bought at that level, you would have been, using the comparable and hedging your bet in a way that protected yourself. Now, similarly, if we look at Defenders, #28, again, a character who is currently in the MCU, Sylvester Stallone is playing him. There's not as much data here. There's only 14 of these books on on the census. But if we look at the fair market value for this thing, it's suggested 2,600. Last couple sales for this was 2,000, 2,200, etc. And we look at some of the 9.8s here. Again, not much data to go off of, but another book that you can see 90-day moving average is selling around the $2,000 range. So there's not that many copies, but 2K seems to be a number that feels like it is a level for a character like this that came out in a year, in the mid 70s and is like kind of a cosmic character and has the potential to, grow in the MCU. So I think that if you were investing in Eternals, around the $2,000 range should have been your cap and would have protected your investment. Now let's do the same thing for Special Marvel Edition. Of course, Special Marvel Edition 15 was the first appearance of Shang-Chi, another book that got extremely hot right before the release of the film, and then definitely had a major correction. And there's a lot of people out there who probably bought at the top and have lost out a lot on their investment. And I think one of the things with this book is that there are a lot of good comparables that you could have looked at for a book like this in order to protect yourself from losing money. And specifically, I'm referring to books like Hero for Hire #1, of course, the first appearance of Luke Cage, and also Marvel Premiere #15, the first appearance of Iron Fist. Okay, so if we look at Hero for Hire #1, this is a book that came out in June 10th of 1972. If we look at Marvel Special Edition, a book that came out December 10th of 1973, so a year later. And then lastly, if we look at Marvel Premiere Iron Fist, May 10th, 1974, so a year after Special Marvel Edition. So again, these are all books, street level kung fu characters that are at the same level, that came out around the same year. So, the census counts for these things are going to be similar. So let's take a look and let's see at some of the comparables for these particular books. And of course, I would definitely make the argument that before the film, Iron Fist and Luke Cage were definitely more popular characters within Marvel comic books than Shang-Chi was. So that is another thing to factor in when you're thinking about the potential of a comic book like Special Marvel Edition 15. So here we are at the beginning of the year. We see this book at a 7.0 grade. I pulled out the 7.0 because there is more information on that. We can't look at the 9.8s because there's too few on the census. So if we look at this book, Special Marvel Edition at the 7.0, average price for this thing at the beginning of the year was $426. When we flash forward to the height of it, we see average price around $905 with a record high, someone paying a 7.0 for $1,000 this year. And then now we flash forward to after the movie, and where do we sit? Average price now for this book is $517. So someone out there spent $1,000 on this book, and if they were to buy it today, they would be able to get it for $500. So they definitely lost out on $500, or they left $500 on the table, losing out on their investment. So let's take a look at some of the numbers with Hero for Hire at the 7.0 grade and the Iron Fist book, and see where this book is at. So at the beginning of the year, we see this book sitting around the $300 range or so, and then at a certain peak it hit up to $800 and now currently sits at $500 or so. So again, if we're looking at the apples to apples comparisons and we're thinking about, okay, I'm someone who wants to invest in Special Marvel Edition, what are some comparables to other books within the market? And if you were to have looked at a book like Hero for Hire #1, you would have got a general sense that spending more than like $600 on this book might be too much, or at least that's what Hero for Hire, generally speaking, throughout the year has gone for. That's the support floor. That's what people in the market generally are paying for a book like this. So you could have told yourself, if you were investing in Special Marvel Edition 15, that your ceiling for your price point would have been around $600. Maybe you could have bumped it up to $650 because that there is a movie that is coming out this year. And if you were to do that, you may be still a little bit in the red overall, but you would have protected your investment. You wouldn't have been that person that spent $1,000 for it. Similarly, if we look at Marvel Premiere 15, Iron Fist, and we look at the 7.0 grade, we'll take a look at the journey for this book this year. At the beginning of the year, we see average price for it was $250. It goes to a certain high of $547, and then now kind of sits around the $345 range. So again, another comparable for a character that is actually lower than the Hero for Hire book, but one that, it still gives you a good sense of like, okay, generally speaking, speaking, the comic book collectors who are spending money on characters like, these street level kung fu characters that came out at around the same time are spending anywhere between $300 to $600. So if I'm someone who wants to buy into Shang-Chi, who again, a character nobody cared about, say 2 years ago, and I'm looking for comparables and I want to protect myself in the investment, that might be the window in which I want to be buying a book like this in order to gain, a certain amount of equity later on if the movie blows up or if the movie is super successful, etc. So kind of to wrap it up, one of the things I kind of wanted to leave with you guys is, when you're buying these things, when you're making these choices, it's really important to sort of do this research. You always want to buy the comp and not the hype. And if you do that, you're going to be, better off to protect yourself whenever you're putting a lot of money into a particular book. Anyways, let me know what you guys think. What do you guys think about comparables? I think it's really important as a comic book collector and an investor to protect yourself. You never want to buy into the hype of a movie. You want to understand what comic collectors are spending on certain characters and certain books, and it's really important for you to find those comparables in the market. Anyways, that's all I have for this video. Drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content, and I will see you in the next one.